was the kind of December morning that carried a deceptive calm, the kind that hides storms beneath its beauty. Snow fell in slow, delicate spirals over the city, blanketing the streets in white silence. Inside her apartment, Emily Carter stood by the window, coffee cooling in her hands, watching the flakes dissolve against the glass. She had imagined this morning differently. Today was supposed to be special. After 5 years together, she was certain that Ethan Brooks would finally propose. Every friend of hers had said the same. He's waiting for Christmas, it'll be perfect. And Emily had believed them. She had even picked out a red dress for the occasion, elegant but understated, with the quiet hope that it would be the one she'd wear when her life changed forever. Her phone buzzed. A message from Grace, her best friend. Don't forget to get your nails done. You never know, today might be the day. Emily smiled faintly and typed back, I think it might be. Hours later, she returned home from work with a flutter in her chest and a bottle of champagne in her hands. Ethan had said he had a surprise for her that night. She entered their apartment to the faint scent of pine candles and the golden lights of the small Christmas tree they'd decorated together. For a moment, it felt like everything she had ever dreamed of. Hey babe, Ethan called from the living room, papers spread across the coffee table, his laptop open. She placed the champagne on the counter, her heart leaping. I brought the nice glasses. Should I chill it first? He looked up, confused. Champagne? What for? Her smile faltered. It's our anniversary, Ethan. There was a pause. Just a few seconds, but long enough to drain all the warmth from the room. Is that today? He asked, standing slowly, guilt already clouding his expression. I'm so sorry. Work's been insane. I completely lost track. She tried to laugh it off, but her voice trembled. 5 years, Ethan, 5 years, and it just slipped your mind. I didn't mean to. No, she interrupted, her tone sharp but fragile. You never mean to. That's the problem. You never mean to forget, or ignore, or avoid, but you do it anyway. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Emily, you know how I feel about marriage. I'm not ready for that kind of commitment. You knew that from the start. She turned away, blinking back tears. Yeah, I did. But I thought love could change that. I thought I could change that. Silence filled the space between them, the kind that hums with everything left unsaid. Finally, she whispered, I can't keep waiting for you to decide if I'm enough. He reached for her, but she stepped back. Maybe we just want different things, she said, and that was it. No shouting, no dramatic ending. Just two people standing in the quiet collapse of something they once believed would last forever. When Ethan finally left, the sound of the door closing echoed like an ending sentence. Emily sank onto the couch, surrounded by the remnants of celebration that would never happen. The unopened champagne, the half-melted candles, the perfect red dress draped over the chair. Outside, the city glowed with Christmas lights, but inside, it felt like the season had forgotten her. Days passed in a blur. Emily stopped answering calls, stopped showing up to work, stopped pretending she was fine. The apartment grew cold, silent, the air filled with the faint scent of pine and regret. Grace visited often, always armed with coffee and stubborn optimism. One night, Grace sat across from her, hands wrapped around a mug of cocoa. You know, she began softly, maybe this is what you needed, a clean break, a chance to find yourself again. Emily gave a faint laugh. I don't want to find myself. I just want him. Grace leaned forward. No, you don't. You want the idea of him. The version of Ethan who noticed anniversaries and made promises. But that's not who he is anymore. Emily looked down at her mug. It's Christmas, Grace. How am I supposed to be happy when everything reminds me of him? Maybe happiness isn't about pretending nothing hurts, Grace said. Maybe it's about remembering what used to make you love this season in the first place. Emily didn't answer. She just stared at the faint reflection of the Christmas tree lights in her cocoa, tiny, trembling stars swimming in the dark. That night, as snow continued to fall outside. She opened the box of ornaments she and Ethan had collected over the years. Each one told a story. The ceramic reindeer from their first Christmas together, the glass heart from their trip to Vermont, the silly photo ornament Grace had given them as a joke. Her hands trembled as she placed them one by one into a bag. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "No more Liam." But even saying it didn't make it true. Christmas was supposed to be about miracles, about warmth and belonging. But this year, it only reminded her how empty a home could feel when love was gone. She lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying their final conversation. Every word, every look. She wondered if he was thinking about her too, if he felt the same ache in his chest when he passed the places they used to go. The next morning, sunlight broke through the curtains, painting the room in gold. It should have felt like a new beginning, but all she felt was the weight of what was missing. She walked to the window, the city alive with holiday music and laughter. People hurried through the snow with shopping bags and smiles. Somewhere below, a man played Christmas carols on a saxophone, his notes soft and lonely. For a moment, Emily let herself imagine another life, one where things had gone differently, where Ethan had remembered, where love hadn't slipped quietly out the door. But life wasn't a Christmas movie. There were no perfect endings, no miraculous reunions, just choices, painful, necessary choices. And as she stood there, coffee cooling once again in her hands, she realized that maybe the first step to healing wasn't about forgetting him. Maybe it was about remembering herself. She took a deep breath, the cold air from the cracked window brushing her face, and whispered, "This Christmas, it's just me." A statement, a promise, a beginning she didn't yet believe in. But sometimes, even the smallest beginnings start in the quietest moments, when the heart finally admits that something has ended and dares to hope that something else might begin. The first week after the breakup felt like walking through a fog, each day blending into the next, colorless and slow. Emily barely noticed the passing hours. Mornings began with coffee she never finished, and nights ended with tears she never meant to shed. Her apartment, once warm and filled with laughter, had become a museum of memories. Every corner whispered his name, the dent in the couch where Ethan used to sit, the faint scent of his cologne that lingered on the hallway coat rack, the photo of them smiling under a snowfall in Central Park that she couldn't yet bring herself to take down. Grace tried everything. She brought flowers one day, pizza the next. She even forced Emily to watch a Christmas movie, marathon, hoping that maybe a few laughs could pull her back to life. But the laughter never came. "Come on," Grace urged one evening, flopping down beside her on the couch. "You can't just rot away in here. You're missing out on Christmas. Your favorite time of year." Emily stared at the dim Christmas tree. "It doesn't feel like Christmas anymore." Grace sighed. "Then maybe it's time to make it feel like it again." "I can't," Emily whispered. "Not without him." Grace looked at her, compassion softening her usual fiery tone. "You don't need him to love the holidays, Em. You never did. Remember last year? You made everyone hot chocolate and forced us to go caroling even though none of us could sing. You are Christmas." Emily let out a weak smile. "That was before I learned that love can disappear overnight." Grace hesitated, then leaned forward. "Maybe it didn't disappear. Maybe it just changed shape. Maybe right now, love looks like letting go." Emily didn't respond. She just stared at the soft glow of the lights, thinking about all the things she couldn't let go of. His laughter, his quiet voice when he was tired, the way he'd always hold her hand at crosswalks like she might drift away if he didn't. Days later, she woke up to a message from her boss, reminding her gently that the office couldn't stay empty forever. Her once flawless reputation as the agency's best real estate broker was starting to fade. She tried to get up, to get dressed, to be the woman she had been. But grief has a way of weighing down even the simplest motions. The world outside her window looked alive. Children building snowmen, couples holding hands under scarves, while her own life felt frozen in place. That afternoon, Grace stopped by again, holding a takeout bag and a look of determination. "Okay," she said firmly. "You've had your week of heartbreak. Now you're getting out of this apartment." Emily raised an eyebrow. "To go where? Another pity party?" "No. A place with actual people. Music. Laughter. Remember those things?" Grace teased. "There's a Christmas fair downtown. You used to love it. Lights, cocoa, Christmas markets. Come on, it's not negotiable." Emily sighed, knowing resistance was useless. "Fine, but I'm not promising I'll smile." Grace grinned. "Baby steps. I'll take breathing and walking first." That night, the city sparkled like it had been dusted in diamonds. The air was sharp with winter cold, filled with the scent of roasted chestnuts and cinnamon. The fair was alive, children squealing with joy, couples sharing scarves, a choir singing carols near the fountain. For the first time in weeks, Emily felt something stir inside her. Not quite happiness, but something close. The ghost of it, maybe. She wrapped her scarf tighter and followed Grace to a booth selling handcrafted ornaments. "Pick one," Grace said, nudging her. "Something to start over with." Emily scanned the table. Her eyes landed on a small, imperfect glass heart. Its surface was cracked in the middle, a thin line running through it, yet it still glimmered beautifully under the lights. "This one," she said softly. Grace smiled, figures broken but still shining. "That's very you." Emily held the ornament close, feeling the chill of the glass in her palm. For a fleeting second, she imagined hanging it on her tree, her own symbol of healing. But as she looked around, she saw couples laughing together, and the fragile calm inside her shattered. Her chest tightened. "Grace, I can't do this," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought I could, but everything here just reminds me of what I lost." Grace's expression softened immediately. "Okay, let's go home." Back in the apartment, Emily dropped her coat, sat on the couch, and stared at the small glass heart resting on the coffee table. She hated that it reflected her so perfectly, whole on the outside, but fractured beneath the surface. Later that night, as Grace prepared to leave, she hesitated at the door. She said quietly, "You don't have to force yourself to be okay, but promise me you'll at least try to find something that helps you breathe again. Go somewhere new. Do something for you." Emily didn't answer. She just nodded faintly. When the door closed, the silence returned, heavier than before. She sat for a long time, watching the snow drift past the window. Somewhere deep inside, her heart whispered a truth she didn't want to face, that love, no matter how beautiful, can't be the only thing that defines a person. As she got up to turn off the lights, her eyes landed once more on the cracked glass heart. The light from the tree caught its surface, and for a brief moment, it shone like something mended rather than broken. And though she couldn't explain why, Emily felt the faintest flicker of courage. Maybe Grace was right. Maybe the way out of heartbreak wasn't through forgetting, but through rediscovery. She took the ornament in her hand, placed it gently on the tree, and whispered to herself, "One day at a time." It wasn't a promise of happiness, just a quiet surrender to hope, fragile, uncertain, but real. And that was how healing began, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet decision to keep moving, even when your heart is still learning how to beat again. The following week, the world outside grew brighter with Christmas cheer, while Emily's life remained dim. She went back to work, but even the familiar rhythm of open houses and polite smiles felt hollow. She moved through each day like a shadow, her laughter replaced by polite nods, her spark buried beneath quiet exhaustion. At night, she returned to an apartment that no longer felt like home. The lights on her tree blinked softly, but their glow only reminded her of what was missing. One Thursday evening, Grace called again, her tone too cheerful to be innocent. "So, I found something that might actually save you from becoming a permanent couch decoration." Emily rolled her eyes. Oh no. What now? Grace's voice was practically glowing through the phone. It's called Hearts at Christmas. A singles-only holiday retreat in Vermont. No dating, no pressure. Just people who need a reset. Holiday activities, new friends, hot cocoa by the fire. It's like therapy wrapped in tinsel. Emily frowned. A singles retreat. Grace, that sounds like the start of a bad reality show. Maybe, Grace said, unfazed. But you need a change. You've spent weeks hiding from life. And honestly, Em, it's painful to watch. You need to remember what joy feels like. What you feel like. Emily sighed, staring at the snow falling beyond her window. What if I go, and it doesn't help? What if it just makes me feel worse? Then you come back, Grace replied simply. But what if it helps you remember that there's still life out there waiting for you? Her words lingered long after they hung up. That night, Emily sat in bed, scrolling through the retreat's website. Pictures of a cozy mountain lodge filled her screen. Fireplaces, pine wreaths, smiling people holding mugs of cocoa. The tagline read, "Rediscover the magic of Christmas and yourself." Something about it stirred her. A whisper of curiosity, of longing for something other than heartbreak. By morning, the decision had been made. She booked the trip. When the taxi pulled up in front of her building a few days later, Emily stood at the curb, suitcase in hand, heart pounding. The city behind her was bustling with holiday chaos, horns, lights, and laughter. Ahead of her lay the unknown. Where to? The driver asked. Vermont, she said softly. The drive took hours. Snow thickened as they climbed into the mountains, the gray city fading into white silence. Emily stared out the window, mesmerized by the trees bending under the weight of snow, the soft blur of distant lights from cabins scattered in the hills. When they finally arrived, the lodge looked like something out of a Christmas card, rustic yet warm, with candles flickering in the windows and wreaths hanging from every door. A wooden sign read Hearts at Christmas, a holiday sanctuary for the soul. Inside, the air smelled of cinnamon and pine. The crackle of a fireplace echoed through the lobby, and laughter floated from a nearby room. At the reception desk stood a woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes. "You must be Emily," she said with a smile. "Welcome to Hearts at Christmas. I'm Clara." Her voice carried a calm warmth, like someone who'd learned how to heal by helping others do the same. "Thank you," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. Clara handed her a small envelope with her room key. "This will be your home for the week. Dinner's at 7, but we'll have a welcome gathering by the fire at 4. We like to keep things simple here. Rest, reflect, reconnect." As Emily turned to leave, she nearly collided with a man carrying 2 suitcases. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said, stepping back. He chuckled. A rich, warm sound. No harm done. I should have been watching where I was going. He was tall, dressed in a wool coat, with the faintest trace of a British accent. His smile carried an easy charm. "First day?" he asked. "Yeah," she replied. "You too, indeed." "Henry Collins," he said, extending a hand. Recovering workaholic, an aspiring believer in Christmas miracles. She couldn't help but smile. "Emily Carter. Recovering romantic." "Well then," he said with a grin, "seems we've come to the right place." Later, in her room, Emily unpacked slowly, letting the silence settle. The view from her window overlooked a frozen lake dusted with snow, the trees glowing in the late afternoon sun. For the first time in weeks, she felt something she hadn't felt since before the breakup: peace. At 4, she made her way downstairs to the welcome gathering. The fireplace roared, casting golden light across the faces of the other guests. Clara stood near the fire, a cup of tea in her hands. "Christmas," she began, "can be a complicated season. For some, it's full of love and laughter. For others, it's a reminder of what was lost. But here, we let go of expectations. We rediscover joy, not through someone else, but within ourselves. Her voice softened. My only rule is simple. No dating. This is a space to heal, not to replace. You must learn to love your own company first. There were nods and murmurs of agreement. Emily found a seat near the fire, and for the first time, she didn't feel entirely out of place. The warmth of the room, the quiet chatter, the soft glow, the sound of snow brushing against the windows, began to melt something inside her. A woman beside her, perhaps in her 50s, smiled kindly. First time here? Yes, Emily replied. You? Oh, fourth year, the woman said. I'm Nora. Lost my husband 5 years ago. This place saved me. It's not about forgetting. It's about remembering differently. Emily nodded slowly, the words sinking deep. Remembering differently, she repeated softly. Exactly, Nora said, with a knowing smile. You'll see. Christmas still has room for you. As the night wore on, Emily found herself laughing quietly with strangers, sipping cocoa that tasted sweeter than it had in years. And for a fleeting moment, she forgot the ache. She didn't know it yet, but this small decision, this 1 week away, would change everything. Because sometimes, healing doesn't begin with answers. It begins with a choice to keep showing up, even when the heart still hurts, and hope feels fragile. Morning arrived in the mountains with a quiet grace. The sun slipped gently over the snow-dusted peaks, painting the world in gold. Emily woke to the soft creak of the old lodge, settling into another winter day. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the scent of cinnamon and freshly brewed coffee drifted through the air, and she remembered. She wasn't home. She was somewhere new. Somewhere untouched by the memories that haunted her apartment. She dressed slowly, wrapping herself in a thick sweater and scarf, before heading downstairs. The common room buzzed with the murmurs of guests' laughter, the clinking of mugs, the crackle of the fire. And there, by the window overlooking the lake, sat Henry Collins. He was reading a worn paperback, his glasses sliding slightly down his nose. Good morning, she said, approaching hesitantly. He looked up, a spark of warmth in his eyes. Ah, Emily Carter. The recovering romantic, wasn't it? Did the mountain air fix you yet? She smiled faintly. Not yet, but I think it's working on me. Good. It's got a habit of sneaking up on people. He closed his book and gestured to the seat across from him. Join me, unless you'd rather have breakfast in solitude. Not today, she said, taking the seat. I've had enough solitude to last a lifetime. They shared breakfast by the fire, pancakes, berries, and laughter that came more easily than Emily expected. Henry talked about his work running a family chocolate business in London. How he'd come to the retreat for market research, but secretly hoped to rediscover the joy of the holidays. I sell happiness for a living, he said, stirring his coffee. Yet somewhere along the way, I forgot how to feel it myself. Emily nodded. I know that feeling. I used to love Christmas. I think I still do, deep down. It just hurts too much to love something that reminds me of who I was with. He looked at her thoughtfully. And who you are without him. She paused. That part's still under construction. Henry smiled gently. Well, perhaps this is the perfect workshop for rebuilding. Later that morning, Clara gathered the group for their first activity, decorating the Great Hall. The tables overflowed with garlands, ornaments, ribbons, and pine cones. It should have felt chaotic, but instead, it felt oddly soothing. Laughter echoed as people untangled strings of lights and debated over which tree-topper looked best. Emily stood on a small stool, hanging golden ornaments on the taller branches of the lodge's massive Christmas tree. From behind her, she heard Henry chuckle. Careful, he said. At this rate, you'll be competing with the decorators at Rockefeller Center. I'll take that as a compliment, she said, adjusting an ornament. He handed her another. Here. This one's my favorite, a chocolate-shaped snowflake. She laughed. Of course it is. When she stepped down, her hand brushed his by accident. It was the briefest touch, but it sent an unexpected warmth through her. She glanced at him, at the easy smile, the light in his eyes, and quickly looked away. That afternoon, Clara introduced a few new guests who had just arrived late due to the snow. Among them was a man Emily hadn't seen in months, tall, familiar, with hair slightly tousled from the cold. Her breath caught. It was Ethan. The room seemed to blur around her. His gaze swept the crowd until it met hers. For a moment, neither of them moved. Time folded in on itself. All the weeks of silence, the pain, the sleepless nights, condensed into that single, shattering instant. "Ethan Brooks," Clara said warmly. "Welcome to Hearts at Christmas. You're just in time for the afternoon tea." He nodded politely, but his eyes never left Emily. Clara smiled. "You two seem to know each other." Emily's voice barely worked. "We used to." "Oh, wonderful," Clara said cheerfully, unaware of the tension beneath the surface. "Then you'll have someone familiar to talk to." When the crowd dispersed, Emily retreated toward the fireplace, trying to steady her breath. She could feel Ethan's presence nearby, could almost hear the memory of his laughter. "Emily," he said softly, approaching. She froze. "What are you doing here?" He hesitated. "Honestly, I'm not sure. I heard about this place from a friend at work. He was supposed to come, but he canceled last minute. So, I came instead." "You came to a singles retreat," she said, her voice brittle. "That's rich." "Yeah," he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "I didn't exactly read the fine print, but maybe it's where I'm supposed to be." She turned to him, anger and confusion warring in her eyes. "Why, Ethan? Haven't you done enough damage already?" He sighed, looking tired, older. "Somehow, I didn't come here to bother you. I just needed space, to think, to figure out who I am when everything I love isn't falling apart." Her chest tightened. "Then I guess we're both here for the same reason." Neither spoke for a moment. The sound of laughter and Christmas music filled the silence between them. "Finally," she said, "we should probably tell Clara we've met before. You know, before she accidentally assigns us to bake cookies together or something." As if summoned by fate, Clara appeared beside them with a bright smile. Perfect timing. "I'm pairing everyone up for tomorrow's gingerbread activity." Emily felt her heart sink. "Emily, you'll be with." Clara scanned her list. "Ethan?" Emily blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" Clara smiled. "You two already know each other. It'll be wonderful. And remember the rule, no dating. Just friendship and fun." Ethan glanced at Emily, his expression unreadable. "Friendship and fun. Got it." That night, Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The universe, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. She had come here to forget him, to start over, and somehow, he had followed her into the one place she thought she'd be safe. Downstairs, the fireplace still glowed faintly, its embers whispering in the dark. She closed her eyes and tried to steady her heart, but one thought refused to leave her. If healing was supposed to begin here, then maybe the first step wasn't about escaping her past. Maybe it was about finally facing it. And tomorrow, she would have no choice. The next morning, the sky was painted in pale blue and silver, the kind of winter light that makes the world look frozen in time. Emily stood by her window, wrapped in a wool blanket, watching the snow drift across the lake. The reflection of the sunrise shimmered on the ice, soft and distant. She wished her heart felt as still as the world outside. Today was the gingerbread workshop, which meant one thing: she would have to face Ethan. She tried to convince herself it didn't matter. It was just one activity, one afternoon, and then she could avoid him for the rest of the retreat. But deep down, she knew better. You can't ignore the person who once knew every version of your heart. When she finally entered the kitchen, the warm smell of sugar and cinnamon hit her instantly. Laughter filled the air as groups formed around the long wooden tables, already covered in flour, icing, and sprinkles. Clara was in her element, bustling around with her clipboard and her ever-present smile. "Ah, Emily. There you are," she called out. "Your partner's already waiting." Emily turned, and there he was. Ethan stood at their station, sleeves rolled up, his hair slightly tousled, a faint nervous smile tugging at his lips. "Hey," he said softly. "Hi," she replied, her tone cautious, guarded. Clara clapped her hands. "Remember, everyone, teamwork is key. And no arguing over icing colors." That last part earned a few laughs. But Emily and Ethan stayed silent, staring awkwardly at the mixing bowls in front of them. "So," Ethan began, "flour or sugar first?" She shrugged. "You always handled the baking part. I was just there to decorate." He smiled faintly. "You mean to eat the frosting straight from the bowl?" Her lips twitched, the ghost of a smile threatening to surface, but she quickly looked away. Some traditions are worth keeping. They worked in silence for a while. Every so often, their hands brushed as they reached for the same utensil. And each time it happened, she felt a quiet sting of memory, the comfort of their old rhythm, the ease of being together without needing words. "How have you been?" he asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Emily hesitated, rolling dough between her palms. "Fine. Just fine," she sighed. "You don't get to ask me that, Ethan." He looked down, guilt flickering in his eyes. "You're right. I wanted to make sure you're okay." She met his gaze, her voice steady. "You don't have to worry about me anymore." "I know," he said quietly. "But I still do." The honesty in his voice startled her, but before she could respond, Clara's voice rang out across the room. "All right, everyone. Let's see those creations come to life." Ethan reached for a piping bag filled with icing. "Here, I'll do the edges if you handle the windows." "Like old times," she said dryly. He smiled. Exactly like old times, but as they decorated, something shifted. The tension between them softened into familiarity, fragile, tentative, but real. She found herself laughing when he smudged frosting on his cheek, and for a moment, it was almost easy to forget the ache between them. Until Clara came by and said, "You two make a great team." The words landed heavier than they should have. Emily froze, her hand trembling slightly as she placed the last candy onto the gingerbread roof. "Yeah," Ethan said softly, his eyes never leaving her face. "We used to." When the session ended, Emily excused herself quickly, mumbling something about needing air. She stepped outside, the cold biting against her flushed skin. Snow crunched beneath her boots as she walked toward the frozen lake. Her breath came out in clouds as she whispered to herself, "You can't fall apart again. Not here." She didn't hear the footsteps behind her until a familiar voice said, "Still walking away when things get hard." Huh. It was Henry. He stood a few feet away, holding 2 steaming mugs. "I figured you might need this," he said, handing her one. "Hot chocolate, with too much whipped cream." "Doctor's orders." Emily managed a weak smile. "You're becoming my caffeine supplier. Someone has to keep you functioning," he teased. "You disappeared right after the activity. Thought I'd check if you were okay. I just needed some space." Henry nodded, his gaze gentle. "You don't have to explain. I saw the look on your face when that guy walked in yesterday. I take it he's the reason you're here." Emily hesitated. "He's part of it. We were together for 5 years. I thought we'd get married. Turns out, we didn't even want the same future." Henry was quiet for a moment before saying softly, "Sometimes love ends, not because it isn't real, but because it isn't growing anymore." She looked at him. "Did that happen to you?" He smiled sadly. "Once. I got so busy building my business that I forgot to build a life with someone. She left, and I can't blame her. But every year around Christmas, I still wonder if she's happy." For a moment, they stood in silence, the only sound the wind sweeping across the frozen lake. "You're very good at giving advice," Emily said finally. "Maybe you should start a side business, Henry's heart repairs." He laughed softly. "I'd go bankrupt within a week. I'm better at making chocolate than mending hearts." "Maybe that's the same thing," she said, smiling faintly. "Both bring sweetness back to life." He looked at her for a long moment, not with pity, but with quiet admiration. "You're stronger than you think, Emily Carter." And for the first time since arriving, she almost believed him. That night, as she lay in bed, Emily couldn't stop thinking about the two men who now occupied her thoughts, the one who broke her heart and the one who seemed to understand it without needing to say much at all. But she didn't want to think about romance. She had promised herself this trip would be about healing, not falling again. Still, as she drifted towards sleep, she realized something had changed. For the first time since the breakup, her dreams weren't filled with loss. They were filled with light, laughter, snow, and the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't over yet. The morning began with the low hum of conversation and the smell of coffee drifting through the dining hall. Snow fell outside like powdered sugar, and laughter rose from the tables where people gathered in their sweaters and scarves, each of them a little less guarded than the day before. Emily sat at a corner table with Nora, the older woman she'd met the first night. Nora's eyes sparkled with that soft wisdom that only comes from having lived through heartbreak and finding the courage to love life again. "You're quieter today," Nora said, stirring her tea. "What's on your mind, dear?" Emily traced her finger along the rim of her mug. "Just memories. You ever feel like you came here to heal, but instead all the old wounds are reopening?" Nora smiled kindly. "That's how healing begins, sweetheart. The pain has to surface before it can leave you." Emily nodded, though her chest still felt heavy. She didn't tell Nora that she'd spent most of the night replaying moments from her relationship with Ethan, their laughter, their arguments, the way he used to look at her when he thought she wasn't watching. Across the room, Ethan sat with a few other guests, laughing at something one of them had said. For a moment, he looked exactly like the man she'd fallen in love with years ago, open, warm, alive. Then their eyes met across the hall, and the air between them shifted, filled with the weight of everything left unsaid. Henry walked in then, brushing snow from his coat. He spotted Emily and Nora, smiled, and joined them. "You know," he said, setting down his cup, "I'm convinced Clara is secretly feeding us experimental doses of happiness. There's no other reason anyone should be this cheerful before 9 a.m., Nora chuckled. "You're not wrong. She's got something magical about her." "Magic or caffeine," Henry said, raising his mug. "Either works." Emily smiled, grateful for the lightness he brought wherever he went. "You seem in a better mood today." He nodded. "That's because Clara just announced our next big event, the Great Christmas Bake-Off. Apparently, we're baking cookies for the town's charity drive tonight." Nora clapped her hands. "Oh, that's wonderful. The local children's hospital, right?" "Exactly," Henry said. "Though between us, I think half of us will burn something before lunch." Emily laughed. "You might be right about that. Don't worry," Henry said with mock confidence. "I'll protect the cookies from any emotional damage." It was a harmless joke, but it made her laugh harder than she had in weeks. Later, when Clara gathered everyone in the kitchen for the baking event, the room was already buzzing with energy. Rolling pins clattered, flour dusted the air like snow, and someone had started playing carols softly through a speaker. Clara stood in front of the group, her smile bright as ever. "All right, my darlings," she announced. "This is a group project, which means teamwork. And remember, the golden rule of hearts at Christmas, no romance. This is about rediscovering joy, not distraction." She looked directly at Henry as she said it, though her tone was teasing. He placed a hand over his chest dramatically. "Me. I'm here purely for the sugar and the spiritual growth." Everyone laughed, including Clara, though her eyes lingered on him a moment longer than necessary. When the groups were assigned, Emily found herself paired with Nora, and of course, Ethan. Clara's idea of fate, no doubt. Ethan smiled awkwardly. "Guess we're a team again." Nora winked at Emily. "I'll supervise, you to handle the chaos." Emily crossed her arms. "Fine, but I'm not cleaning up your mess this time." Ethan chuckled softly. "I'll try to be less messy than before." They fell into rhythm, mixing dough and trading small talk, that danced around the edges of their shared past. The smell of cinnamon and vanilla filled the air, and for a fleeting second, it felt like they were back in their old apartment, laughing over burnt cookies and spilled sugar. Nora hummed quietly as she shaped cookies beside them. "You two work well together," she said with a knowing smile. "You can feel it in the air." Emily felt her cheeks warm. "We used to. That was a long time ago." Ethan looked at her. "Not that long." Something in his tone made her look up. His eyes were softer than she remembered. Tired, maybe, but honest. Before she could respond, Nora broke the tension with a clap of her hands. "All right, bakers. Let's see those masterpieces." By the time they were done, the counters were covered in trays of cookies, some beautifully shaped, others misshapen and dusted with too much sugar. Laughter filled the room again, and for a while, even Emily felt lighter. Then Clara entered with her ever-present clipboard. "Everything smells divine," she said. "Now, once we pack these up, you'll all have the afternoon to yourselves. But tonight, I expect everyone in the lounge for a letter-writing tradition." "Letter writing?" Henry asked. Clara nodded. "Every year, each of you writes a private letter to Santa, or to life, or fate, or whoever you believe in. You write your wish for the new year, seal it, and place it in the red box by the fire. It's a way of letting go of the past and opening your heart again." She smiled warmly. "It's not magic, but it feels close enough." When evening came, the lodge glowed with candlelight. One by one, the guests slipped their sealed envelopes into the red box. Some smiled, others looked near tears. When it was Emily's turn, she hesitated, staring at the blank page. Then she began to write. "Dear Santa, I don't need gifts this year. I don't even know if I believe in wishes anymore. But if there's one thing I want, it's courage, the kind that lets me face what hurts without hiding from it. The kind that reminds me who I am when I'm alone. And maybe, someday, if love finds its way back to me, I hope I'll be ready to open the door." She folded the letter gently and slipped it into the box. As she turned away, she noticed Ethan standing near the fire, his letter still in his hands. Their eyes met, and for the briefest moment, something passed between them. A quiet acknowledgement, a shared ache. Neither spoke. But, for the first time in months, Emily didn't look away. The snow fell harder outside, muffling the world in white, and somewhere deep within her, something began to thaw. The following morning greeted the lodge with a silence so pure it almost felt sacred. The snow had stopped falling during the night, leaving behind a world wrapped in silver and white. The lake below glistened under the pale sun, still and perfect, as if time itself had paused just to breathe. Inside, Clara's voice carried through the halls. "Rise and shine, my Christmas souls. Breakfast is ready, and so is your next adventure." Emily smiled faintly as she brushed her hair, hearing Nora laugh from down the hall. The energy in the lodge had shifted since the letters the night before, lighter somehow, more hopeful. It was as if everyone had left a small piece of their pain in that red box by the fire. Downstairs, the dining room buzzed with quiet conversation and the comforting scent of freshly baked scones. Henry was already there, standing near the coffee urn and chatting animatedly with Clara, who looked uncharacteristically flustered as he spoke. When he noticed Emily enter, he waved her over. "Morning, Emily. You've missed quite the debate, apparently. Clara insists raisins belong in scones, while I firmly disagree." Clara crossed her arms. "They add texture," Henry smirked. "They add disappointment." Emily laughed, a genuine sound that made both of them pause for a second. It was the kind of laugh that warmed the room, that reminded her what joy used to feel like. "You're siding with me, right?" Henry asked playfully. "I plead the fifth," Emily replied. "I'm just happy to be eating something that isn't instant noodles," he chuckled. "Fair enough." When breakfast ended, Clara clinked a spoon against her cup to get everyone's attention. "All right, my lovely people. This afternoon, we're having a Christmas picnic by the frozen lake. Blankets, cocoa, and most importantly, stories. Each of you will share your favorite Christmas memory. I promise, it's less terrifying than it sounds. There were murmurs of excitement. Henry leaned toward Emily. You think we'll be graded on emotional depth? She smiled. You'll probably get extra credit if you cry. He placed a hand dramatically over his heart. Challenge accepted. By the time the picnic began, the sun hung low over the trees, bathing the world in a golden glow. Clara and a few volunteers had set up long blankets near the frozen edge of the lake, with baskets of cookies, hot chocolate, and lanterns flickering softly against the snow. It felt like something out of a postcard, impossibly beautiful, a moment untouched by worry. Emily sat beside Nora, who was sipping cocoa with a grin. Clara outdid herself this year, Nora said. You can't help but feel alive in a place like this. Emily nodded, watching her breath turn to mist in the cold air. It's different here. Peaceful. That's because you're finally starting to let go, Nora said knowingly. You can't carry sorrow and peace in the same heart, dear. One eventually pushes the other out. Before Emily could reply, Clara clapped her hands. All right, everyone. Time for our stories. The group went around, one by one, sharing moments of childhood Christmases, lost loves, funny disasters, and small miracles. Laughter filled the air, mingling with the scent of cocoa and pine. When it was Emily's turn, she hesitated. Dozens of eyes turned toward her, expectant but kind. She took a deep breath. My favorite Christmas memory, she began softly, wasn't about presents or trees or lights. It was about giving something back. When I was little, my sister and I saved every coin we could to buy our parents a painting of our family. It wasn't much, but when they opened it, they cried. I think that was the first time I understood what love really means. Not perfection, not promises. Just small moments that make someone else feel seen. Her voice wavered slightly at the end, and for a heartbeat, the whole group was silent. Then Nora reached over and squeezed her hand, her smile warm and proud. That's beautiful, Clara said softly. Thank you, Emily. As the stories continued, Emily felt the heaviness in her chest begin to ease. These people, strangers who had become something like family, were all searching for the same thing: healing, connection, hope. When the last story ended, Clara raised her mug. To new beginnings, she said. And to remembering that Christmas isn't about who we've lost, it's about the love we still carry. Everyone lifted their cups in a toast. To new beginnings. The moment lingered, soft, golden, timeless. As the group began to disperse, Ethan approached her quietly, his breath visible in the cold. That story, he said, his tone gentle. It was beautiful. She turned to him, unsure how to respond. It was just a memory. No, he said. It was more than that. You've always had this way of seeing beauty where most people only see pain. His words hit her harder than she expected. For a moment, she wanted to tell him how much his absence had hurt, how she'd spent nights trying to understand what went wrong. But then she saw the sincerity in his eyes. The same tenderness that had once made her fall in love, and she couldn't bring herself to speak. He smiled faintly. I'm glad you came here, Emily. You seem lighter. Maybe that's what happens when you stop waiting for someone to fix you, she said quietly. The honesty in her words surprised even her. Ethan nodded slowly, almost sadly. I deserved that. You did, she said. Then, after a pause, but I didn't come here to hate you, Ethan. I came to remember who I was before everything broke. And who is she? Emily looked out across the frozen lake, the fading sunlight glinting off the surface like shattered glass. She's someone learning to forgive herself, and maybe even forgive you. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The world around them was still, the air heavy with snow and unspoken words. Then Ethan said quietly, maybe forgiveness is its own kind of love. Maybe, Emily whispered, but it's the kind you don't give to get something back. She turned to leave, but before she could take a step, Nora called out from behind them, holding 2 mugs. You two done solving the world's problems? Come warm up before we all freeze to death." Ethan smiled, and for once, Emily found herself smiling back. That night, as she lay in bed, she replayed the afternoon in her mind, the laughter, the stories, the warmth of strangers. For the first time in a long while, she didn't fall asleep with tears in her eyes. Maybe, just maybe, this place really was helping her heal. And though she didn't know it yet, her heart, once broken and buried beneath winter's weight, was beginning to stir again. Not in a rush, not in desperation, but in the quiet way that hope always returns. Like dawn after the longest night, the lodge was quiet the next morning. The kind of peaceful stillness that made every sound feel amplified. The crack of the fireplace, the soft shuffle of slippers on wooden floors, the occasional whisper of wind brushing against the windows. Snow had fallen again overnight, blanketing the world in pure white. It felt like a reset button, as if nature itself was reminding everyone that it's never too late to begin again. Emily stood by the window in the reading lounge, a mug of cocoa warming her hands. She watched as Henry walked outside, his breath fogging in the cold air while he helped Clara hang garlands around the porch railing. Every now and then, Clara would laugh, and Henry would feign offense, pressing a hand to his heart as if wounded. Emily smiled to herself. There was something beautiful about their energy, to people who hadn't expected joy, stumbling into it quietly. Nora appeared beside her, wrapped in a plaid shawl. "He's smitten," she whispered conspiratorially. Emily chuckled. "You think so?" "I know so," Nora said, sitting down beside her. "You can tell by how he looks at her, like he's remembering what it feels like to be alive again. Funny how love has a way of sneaking up on us right after we've sworn it off." Emily leaned against the window frame, her voice soft. "Maybe some people are just meant to find each other no matter what. And some people," Nora added with a gentle smile, "need to get out of their own way first." Emily didn't have to ask what she meant. The implication hung between them like the scent of pine in the air. That afternoon, Clara gathered everyone in the Great Hall for what she called the Heart of Christmas, an annual tradition at the retreat. The fire roared, the scent of baked cookies and hot cider filled the room, and each guest was given an envelope, a pen, and a single piece of gold-edged stationery. Clara stood before the group, her voice warm but steady. "Each of you has faced something that brought you here. Loss, heartbreak, disappointment. Whatever it was heavy enough to carry you into the mountains, seeking peace. This letter is your way of letting go. You can write to anyone, even yourself. Or," she added with a playful twinkle, "to Santa Claus himself. Because deep down, we're all still children, hoping someone out there is listening." A soft laughter rippled through the room, but the mood quickly settled into calm reflection. The only sounds were the scratching of pens on paper and the occasional sigh. Emily stared at the blank page before her, the pen trembling slightly in her hand. For several minutes, she couldn't bring herself to write a single word. What was there left to say? What could possibly fit into a letter that would make her heart any lighter? Then she thought of the first Christmas she'd ever spent with Ethan. The way he'd surprised her with a handmade ornament shaped like a tiny house, telling her it symbolized the life they'd build someday. She still had it, tucked away in a box she couldn't bear to open. Her eyes stung, and slowly, the words began to flow. "Dear Santa, it feels strange writing to you after all these years. I'm not asking for anything shiny or wrapped in ribbons. I just want peace, the kind that doesn't depend on someone else's presence or absence. I want to wake up and feel grateful for what remains, not broken over what's gone. And maybe, if it's not too much, I'd like to believe in love again. Not the kind that fades when things get hard, but the kind that stays when it's easier to leave. Emily." She folded the letter carefully, her hands trembling as she slipped it into the envelope. When Clara passed around the red box, Emily hesitated for just a moment before placing it inside. It felt symbolic, like sealing away an old chapter. Across the room, She noticed Ethan holding his own letter, unreadable emotion flickering across his face. Their eyes met briefly, and though neither smiled, there was an unspoken understanding there, something fragile and true. Later, when most of the guests had gone to rest before dinner, Emily stayed behind, sitting by the fire. The flames danced before her, crackling softly, as though whispering secrets only the heart could understand. Ethan entered quietly and sat down in the chair opposite hers. For a while, they didn't speak. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was almost comforting, like two people sharing the same thought without needing words. He finally said, "What did you write?" She shook her head with a small smile. "You're not supposed to ask. It's private." "Ah," he said softly. "So you did write one. Of course you." He nodded. "Yeah. Though I'm not sure mine counts as hopeful." She tilted her head. "Why?" He looked into the fire, his voice quiet. "Because I realized I've been running from guilt, not pain. I told myself I didn't want to get married because I wasn't ready. But the truth is, I was scared. Scared of failing. Scared of losing you, the way my dad lost my mom. I thought if I never made a promise, I couldn't break one." Her chest tightened. "Ethan." He shook his head, his tone heavy with regret. "I was wrong. And by the time I realized it, you were already gone." The room was so still that even the fire seemed to hush. Emily's heart ached at his confession, not because she hadn't known, but because hearing him say it made the wound feel fresh again. "You can't fix what's already burned down," she said softly. "But you can learn from the ashes." He nodded slowly, his eyes shining with emotion. Maybe that's what this place is for. Learning how to stop standing in the smoke. For a long while, they just sat there, two people who had once loved each other deeply, trying to make peace with the ghosts of who they'd been. Then Clara's voice drifted from the doorway, light and teasing. "If either of you catches fire from sitting so close, I'm not responsible." They both laughed, and for the first time, it wasn't painful. That night, Emily returned to her room feeling different. Not lighter, exactly, but freer, like a weight she'd been carrying for so long had finally loosened its grip. She opened her journal and wrote one simple line before turning out the light. Maybe love isn't about getting back what was lost. Maybe it's about discovering what still remains. And as the snow fell softly outside her window, she drifted to sleep with a quiet heart, one that, for the first time in a long while, wasn't afraid to dream again. The next day dawned with the kind of crisp brightness that only exists after heavy snow. Sunlight glistened on the frozen lake like scattered diamonds, and the whole lodge seemed wrapped in quiet contentment. The letters had changed something in the air. People were lighter, laughter came easier, and even Clara hummed as she passed through the halls, her red scarf trailing behind her like a festive ribbon. Emily joined Nora and Henry in the dining hall for breakfast, where the smell of fresh cinnamon rolls and coffee made everything feel a little more alive. Henry was explaining, with dramatic flair, the science of perfect chocolate tempering when Clara interrupted, her eyes twinkling. "All right, everyone. Today's the day for my favorite tradition, Secret Santa." Excitement rippled through the room. Clara held up a small basket filled with folded slips of paper. "Each of you will draw a name and prepare a simple, thoughtful gift. Nothing extravagant, just something from the heart. Remember, this isn't about things. It's about thought." One by one, people reached into the basket. When Emily's turn came, she unfolded her slip and read the name silently. Nora. Perfect, she thought with a smile. She already knew exactly what she'd make. Across the room, she saw Ethan looking down at his own paper, a faint smile curving his lips. When he looked up, his gaze met hers for just a second before drifting away. Henry, standing beside her, opened his paper dramatically. "Well, this is interesting," he murmured with a grin. "Who'd you get?" Emily asked. He winked. "Ah, now that would ruin the fun, wouldn't it?" That afternoon, Emily sat by the fire, sketching ideas for her gift. Nora had once mentioned how much she missed her husband's old Christmas tradition, writing her a poem every year. So Emily decided to create a handmade book, small and simple, filled with handwritten quotes about love, hope, and renewal. A keepsake to remind Nora that the heart never really stops loving, it just learns to love differently. Meanwhile, laughter echoed from the craft table near the windows, where Henry was making a grand mess of ribbons, glue, and gold wrapping paper. Clara passed by and shook her head. "Mr. Collins, you have single-handedly used enough tape to wrap the entire lodge." He grinned. "Presentation is half the joy." "Oh," Clara teased. "And what's the other half?" "The look on someone's face when they realize you listened," he said softly, his tone suddenly serious. Clara paused, caught off guard by the sincerity in his voice. "Well," she said after a moment, "then I hope whoever your gift is for knows how lucky they are." Emily watched the exchange with a quiet smile. There was something genuine in the way Clara's eyes softened whenever Henry spoke, though she pretended otherwise. By evening, the lodge buzzed with anticipation. The common room had been transformed, fairy lights draped across the beams, candles flickering on every table, and a pine garland stretching across the fireplace. Snow fell softly outside, visible through the wide windows, and the air carried the faint scent of oranges and cloves. Clara stood in the center of the room. "All right, my loves," she said cheerfully. "It's time to exchange gifts. Remember, when you reveal yourself, make it special. After all, we're celebrating kindness tonight." Laughter and applause followed as the first few people stepped forward, their gifts ranging from knitted scarves to homemade jams. When it was Emily's turn, she walked up to Nora with a small, carefully wrapped package. "Merry Christmas, Nora," she said, smiling. Nora opened the little book, her fingers trembling slightly as she flipped through the pages. "Oh, Emily," she whispered. "This is beautiful." Tears filled her eyes as she read one of the quotes aloud. "Some loves never leave us. They just change their form and follow us home." Nora pulled Emily into a hug. "Thank you, dear. This means more than you'll ever know." Emily blinked back her own tears, her heart swelling with warmth. For once, the joy wasn't forced, it felt real. The next few gifts passed in a blur of laughter and gratitude. When Henry's turn came, he stood, holding a small box, wrapped in silver paper. "This," he said, "is for someone who reminded me that life doesn't end when love does. It simply begins again, in a new way." He walked over to Clara and handed her the box. A hush fell over the room. Clara's cheeks flushed as she unwrapped the gift, a delicate chocolate ornament shaped like a snowflake, perfectly crafted and glossy. Inside was a small note, for the woman who made strangers feel like family. For a moment, Clara didn't speak. Then she looked up, her voice soft. "Thank you, Henry." He smiled gently. "Merry Christmas, Clara." The applause that followed was light and warm, filled with something deeper than simple cheer. Even Ethan clapped, a smile tugging at his lips. Then it was his turn. He stepped forward, holding a small, neatly wrapped package. "My gift," he said, "is for someone who reminded me what forgiveness looks like." Emily's breath caught as he walked toward her. "I know this doesn't make up for everything," he said quietly, "but I wanted you to have it." She opened the box slowly. Inside was a tiny ornament, a glass heart, cracked down the middle, but held together by a band of gold. "It's called kintsugi," Ethan explained. "The Japanese art of repairing what's broken with gold. They believe the cracks make something more beautiful, not less." Emily stared at the ornament, her throat tightening. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It reminded me of you," he said softly. Around them, the laughter and chatter continued, but for a moment it felt like they were the only two people in the room. She looked up at him, eyes shimmering. "Thank you." Ethan smiled faintly. "Merry Christmas, Emily." When the night wound down, everyone lingered by the fire, exchanging hugs and goodbyes before heading to bed. Emily stayed behind, sitting quietly with the glass heart resting in her palm. Its gold seams caught the firelight, glowing faintly like something alive. Henry sat beside her after a while, handing her a mug of cocoa. "That's quite a gift," he said softly. She nodded. "It is. Does it change anything?" he asked gently. Emily turned the ornament over in her hand. "Maybe not between us, but it changes something in me." Henry smiled. "That's a good place to start." She looked at him, her voice quiet. "Do you ever stop feeling afraid of loving again?" He took a long sip before answering. "You don't stop being afraid. You just start hoping louder than the fear." For the first time in a long while, she believed him. The fire crackled, the snow whispered against the windows, and somewhere deep within her chest, hope, fragile and golden, began to glow. Morning came softly, with the sky streaked in rose and pale gold. The snow had stopped during the night, leaving the world still and untouched, a fragile silence that felt like it was holding its breath. Inside the lodge, however, warmth filled every corner. The smell of cinnamon rolls drifted through the air, and faint laughter echoed from the breakfast room. But Emily didn't feel light that morning. Sleep had eluded her. Her thoughts spun endlessly around the events of the night before, the secret Santa, the gifts, Ethan's words. The glass heart sat on her nightstand, glowing faintly in the early light. Its cracks, filled with gold, reflected the fire from the night before. She had cried after everyone went to bed. Not from sadness exactly, but from the confusing mix of emotions that love, regret, and forgiveness often leave behind. When she went downstairs, she found Henry waiting by the fireplace, a cup of coffee in hand and a contemplative look on his face. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, offering her a tired smile. "Something like that," she replied. "Too much thinking." He nodded knowingly. "You know, they say the mind quiets down once the heart starts healing. Personally, I think that's nonsense. Healing is noisy, it's messy. It keeps you awake at night." Emily smiled faintly. "You might be right." Before she could say more, Clara entered the room, carrying a clipboard, her usual bright energy slightly dimmed. "Morning, you two," she greeted softly. "Henry, could I have a quick word?" He blinked. "Of course." They stepped aside, and though Emily couldn't hear their conversation, she could sense a strange tension between them, Clara's voice low and firm, Henry's replies patient but careful. When they finished, Clara gave him a polite nod and walked briskly toward the kitchen, her expression unreadable. Henry sighed and sank into a chair. "Well, that was interesting." "What happened?" Emily asked. "Clara," he said, rubbing the back of his neck, "thinks I've broken her rule." Emily frowned. "The no-romance rule?" He gave a humorless laugh. "Apparently so. She seems to believe I came here looking for something more than peace." "And did you?" He looked into his cup, his tone quiet. "I came here to remember how to feel again. I didn't expect to find someone who made me want to stay." Emily's chest tightened. "Clara." Henry met her eyes and smiled sadly. "Clara." For a long moment, Emily didn't speak. She thought of Clara, kind, disciplined, guarding her heart under layers of grace and rules, and of Henry, open and tender beneath his humor. Maybe that was what scared Clara most, the idea that love might still find her when she'd built her life around avoiding it. Later that morning, as the guests gathered for one last holiday brunch before the retreat ended, the air felt different. The laughter that usually filled the dining hall was softer, edged with the quiet melancholy of goodbyes. Clara stood at the front of the room, her smile gentle but distant. "My dear friends," she began, "this week has been a joy. I've watched each of you rediscover something beautiful, whether it was laughter, courage, or peace. That's what Hearts at Christmas is all about." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. "But as with all good things, our time together must come to an end. Tomorrow morning, the cars will take you back to your lives. Carry what you found here with you. The love, the light, the hope." A murmur of disappointment spread through the group. "Before we close," she continued, "I want to remind you of one thing. Healing doesn't mean you forget what hurt you. It means you make room beside the hurt for something new. Her eyes lingered briefly on Henry. He smiled, but she quickly looked away. After breakfast, everyone began packing, preparing for their departure the next day. Emily walked down the hall toward her room when she heard Clara's voice calling her name. "Emily, could I speak to you for a moment?" She turned. Of course. Clara's expression was troubled. "You've been such a bright spirit here. You brought warmth back to this place, not just for yourself, but for others too. I wanted to thank you for that." Emily smiled softly. "That's kind of you to say, but..." Clara hesitated. "I need to ask you something difficult. It's come to my attention that you and Ethan, what about us?" Emily interrupted, her stomach tightening. "That you might be rekindling something," Clara said delicately. "And if that's the case, I'm afraid it goes against the program's rules. I've worked very hard to maintain a space where people come to heal, not to reopen old wounds." Emily blinked, stunned. "Clara, that's not what's happening. We're not." But Clara's tone was firm. "Emily, please. I understand how feelings can get tangled in places like this. But for the sake of the group, I have to ask you both to leave." The words hit like a blow. "Leave. Today." Clara nodded slowly. Before dinner, Emily's voice trembled. "You don't understand. I didn't plan any of this. I came here to move on. I didn't ask for him to be here." Clara's expression softened, but her resolve didn't waver. "I know, dear. But sometimes the heart brings us face to face with what we're avoiding. Perhaps this is part of your healing, too." Emily wanted to argue, to explain that this wasn't fair, that she'd finally begun to feel like herself again. But Clara's tone left no room for debate. She returned to her room, her heart pounding. The moment the door shut behind her, tears spilled down her cheeks. A knock sounded not long after. It was Ethan. "I just talked to Clara," he said, his voice low. "She's asking us to leave." Emily nodded, wiping her tears. "I know," he exhaled. "I'm so sorry, Em. I swear, I didn't mean for any of this to happen." She shook her head. "It's not your fault. Maybe it's a sign that some things aren't meant to be revisited." Ethan stepped closer, hesitation in his eyes. "Or maybe it's a sign that some things deserve another chance." Her heart ached at his words, the tenderness in them, the sincerity. For a second, she wanted to believe him, but she couldn't. Not yet. She lifted her suitcase and gave him a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Goodbye, Ethan." He looked like he wanted to stop her, to say more, but the words never came. As she walked down the hall toward the exit, the glass heart in her pocket pressed against her palm, a reminder of everything fragile yet enduring inside her. Outside, the cold bit at her cheeks as snowflakes began to fall again, slowly, softly, endlessly. She looked back once, just long enough to see Henry standing by the window, watching Clara with a look that mirrored her own love mixed with the ache of goodbye. And in that quiet, snow-covered moment, Emily understood. Healing wasn't about escaping pain. It was about carrying it differently. So she took a breath, stepped into the waiting car, and let the mountain road carry her away from what had broken her, and, unknowingly, toward what would bring her back home. The drive down the mountain was long and quiet, the kind of silence that seemed to echo louder than words ever could. Snow whirled softly outside the car window, tracing delicate patterns across the glass. Emily sat in the back seat, her suitcase beside her, her hands folded over the cracked glass heart Ethan had given her. She ran her thumb over the golden seams again and again, as if she could smooth away the ache that still lived between them. The driver, a kind older man with a white beard, glanced at her through the mirror. "You were up at Hearts at Christmas, weren't you?" Emily looked up, surprised. "Yes. How did you know?" He smiled. "Only place that makes people look both sad and peaceful at the same time." She gave a faint laugh. "That's probably accurate." He nodded, eyes back on the snowy road. "They say that place works in mysterious ways. brings people the healing they didn't know they were looking for. Emily turned her gaze back to the window, watching as the forest gave way to open hills. Maybe it does, she whispered. When she reached the train station, she thanked the driver and stepped out into the cold. The platform was nearly empty, just a few travelers with red noses and tired eyes, clutching suitcases and paper cups of coffee. She bought a ticket for the next train to Boston, then sat on a bench near the tracks, the world quiet except for the distant whistle of an approaching train. The glass heart still rested in her hands. She thought about everything that had happened, the laughter, the tears, the friendships that had grown in just a few days. She thought about Henry and Clara, about the way they had looked at each other and pretended they weren't both terrified of feeling again. And she thought about Ethan, not as the man who had broken her heart, but as someone who was just as lost as she had been. She realized then that forgiveness wasn't just about him. It was about freeing herself from the version of her that had been waiting for someone else to make her whole. When the train arrived, she took one last look at the snowy mountains before stepping aboard. The world outside the window blurred as the train moved, but inside her chest, something quiet began to settle. Meanwhile, back at the lodge, Ethan stood in the now empty great hall. The guests had gone, the laughter had faded, and all that remained were echoes, half-packed boxes of decorations, the faint scent of pine, and the red letterbox by the fire, filled with unclaimed wishes. He walked to the hearth and knelt, brushing his fingers against the wood where the fire had burned the night before. Then, on instinct, he reached into the letterbox and found one envelope that hadn't been collected. It was hers. He knew by the way she folded the paper, the soft cursive E written on the front. For a long time, he just stared at it, unsure if he had the right to read it. But then, he thought of the words she'd said to him. You can't fix what's burned down. You can only learn from the ashes. So, he opened it. As his eyes moved over her words, his breath caught. Each line was raw, honest, filled with pain and courage. I don't need gifts this year. I don't even know if I believe in wishes anymore. But if there's one thing I want, it's courage. The kind that lets me face what hurts without hiding from it. When he finished reading, his hands trembled. He realized then that she hadn't written about wanting him back. She hadn't written about regret. She had written about becoming whole again, with or without him. And yet, in some strange, unexplainable way, that realization made him love her even more. Henry entered the hall quietly, holding 2 mugs of coffee. I thought you might still be here, he said, setting one down beside Ethan. Ethan looked up, eyes tired. She's gone. Henry nodded. I figured, Clara told me she left early this morning. Ethan sighed, rubbing his forehead. I keep wondering if I should have gone after her. But maybe she deserves the peace of not being followed. Henry took a seat beside him, his tone gentle. Sometimes letting someone go is the most loving thing you can do. But, he paused, studying Ethan's expression. Sometimes the heart doesn't accept peace until it tries one more time. Ethan stared into his coffee. And what about you? You're one to talk. Henry smiled ruefully. Clara and I. That's a different story. Is it? Henry's eyes softened. She built this place to protect herself from heartbreak. But I think she forgot that protection can become a prison. I told her how I feel. She told me love isn't part of the plan. Maybe she'll change her mind. Maybe she won't. But at least I said it. Ethan nodded slowly, the words sinking in like seeds taking root. That night, he packed his things, left a note for Clara thanking her for everything, and began his drive down the mountain. The roads were slick with ice, the air sharp and still. But somewhere in the darkness ahead, he felt a pull, something guiding him, not away from heartbreak, but toward the possibility of home. 3 days later, Emily sat in her apartment, surrounded by half-unpacked luggage and the quiet hum of city life outside. She'd redecorated since coming back. Fewer photos, fewer reminders. The small tree by her window glittered with new ornaments, and near the top hung the cracked glass heart Ethan had given her. It looked different here, not like a relic of pain, but a symbol of everything she'd survived. A knock at the door startled her. When she opened it, the world seemed to still. Ethan stood there, snow in his hair, a single red scarf around his neck, and that familiar nervous smile tugging at his lips. "Before you close the door," he said quickly, "just let me say this." She folded her arms, her heart already racing. "You shouldn't be here, I know," he said, "but I had to come." He took a deep breath. "You once told me love isn't about waiting for someone to change, it's about growing together. I didn't understand that until I lost you. I thought love meant being perfect. Now I know it means showing up, even when you're scared." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a simple gold ring, understated but beautiful. "I'm not asking you to forget what happened. I'm asking for the chance to build something better, something honest." Tears welled in Emily's eyes. "Ethan, I don't know if I can trust this. I've only just started to find myself again." He nodded, his voice breaking. "Then let me meet you there, where you are now, not where we were." For a moment, neither moved. The snow outside began to fall again, soft and endless. And then, quietly, she reached out her hand. "Come in," she whispered. He stepped inside, the warmth of her apartment wrapping around them like forgiveness. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. For the first time in a long while, love didn't feel like a wound trying to heal. It felt like a promise learning to breathe again. Snow returned to the city like a soft confession, drifting past Emily's window as evening settled into a glow of street lamps and shopfront wreaths. Inside her apartment, warmth pooled in the lamplight, and the small tree blinked steadily, a patient heartbeat of color. Ethan stood just inside the door, hat in hand, as if one wrong movement might scatter this moment back into silence. They didn't touch at first. They walked the circumference of the room with words, careful words, honest words, the kind that felt like placing stepping stones across deep water. He told her about the nights after she left, how the apartment swallowed sound, how he couldn't unhear the sentence that ended them. She told him about the mountains, about letters folded like prayers, about a cracked glass heart that taught her to hold herself with both hands. He listened without defending himself. She spoke without trying to be brave. Somewhere in that quiet, they began to inhabit the same room again. He set the ring box on the table and stepped back from it, as if to prove it wouldn't be used as a lifeline. "I don't want to fix this with jewelry," he said, voice low. "I want to fix it with time and presence," she added. His eyes softened. "In presence." They made tea and sat on the floor by the tree like they used to, knees almost touching, the scent of orange peel rising with the steam. Outside, the world blurred into snow and taxis and the hush of December. Inside, everything was still. "Do you remember?" she asked, smiling for real now. "The year we burned the gingerbread and told everyone it was a smoky caramel experiment." He laughed, the sound loosening something knotted between them. "We sold it with such conviction that I started to believe it. Confidence is a seasoning," she said. "So is humility," he answered, gentler. "I brought the second. Late, but I brought it." When the kettle quieted and the tree ticked faintly in the heat, he reached for the ring, then stopped. "May I tell you the promise before I ask the question?" She nodded. "I promise to love you in the daily ways, not just the mountaintop ones. I promise to remember anniversaries, because they're a measure of who we've become, not pressure about who we should be. I promise to ask when I don't know, to pause when I'm scared, to choose you when choosing myself would be easier. And if you ever find me drifting, I promise to turn back before the distance gets a name." Tears warmed her eyes. Not the old kind, not the exhaustion-tinted ones, but the kind that arrive when a truth lands and refuses to move. She took a long breath and set her mug down. "Then let me tell you mine," she said. "I promise to speak before I store hurts like winter in a basement. I promise to remember we are two people with pasts, trying to build a future that gives both stories a room. I promise to love you on Tuesdays, when everything is ordinary, not only on holidays when magic is easy. And if there is ever smoke, I promise to open a window with you before we call it a fire. They were quiet after that, as if the room needed to absorb what had been said. The ring in his hand glinted, not as a solution, but as a small circle of intention. Emily Carter, he whispered, kneeling not as performance but as posture. Will you marry me, not to finish a story, but to begin one? She didn't look at the ring. She looked at him, the steadiness in his eyes, the nameless tenderness that had once been home and wanted to be again. The snow leaned closer to the glass. The city held its breath. Yes, she said, voice soft. Sure. Yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit like something that remembered her. They didn't cheer. They didn't run to tell anyone. They sat in the hush of their own decision and let it be enough. Later, when the kettle sang again, her phone buzzed with a photo from an unknown number. It was Nora, bundled in a ridiculous red hat, smiling at a shy, beaming man who could only be David. The caption read, "He asked me to coffee. I said yes to life. Merry Christmas, dear heart." Emily pressed a hand to her mouth and laughed softly. They did it, she said. They found each other in the after. Send her our love, Ethan replied. There was another message, this one from an unfamiliar email, a forwarded note from Clara through the retreat's mailing list. A photo of the lodge appeared. The great hall dim and golden, garlands freshened, a single chocolate snowflake ornament catching the light. Beneath the photo, a line, "We're open again next December." And some rules were meant to be revised. It was signed with a flourish. See, Emily felt something lovely unfold inside her chest, like ribbon unspooling. I hope she kept him, she said. People who make strangers feel like family rarely do it alone, forever, Ethan answered, smiling. They talked well past midnight. Winter mapped itself across the windows. Their words stitched new edges to a familiar fabric. When they grew tired, they moved slowly through her small apartment, taking down the old photos together. Not to erase them, but to make room. They placed a small frame on the mantel, a picture of the cracked glass heart hanging from her tree, the gold seam shining. Under it, she wrote on a scrap of paper, "More beautiful, not less." He brushed his thumb over her knuckles. "Tomorrow, let's go buy a new ornament for our first page back." "Tomorrow," she said, and let the word mean what it used to, possibility, not pressure. Christmas Eve dawned with a clear sky, cold and bright as a bell. They walked through the market with gloved hands threaded together, stopping for cider so hot it bit their tongues. Street musicians unspooled carols that sounded both old and newly repaired. Vendors called out soft invitations. Cinnamon lifted off pastries like a promise. At a stall of handmade ornaments, Emily paused before a box of tiny houses. They weren't glossy or perfect, just clean lines and painted doors, each slightly different, as if they'd learned to stand by, leaning a little. She chose one with a blue door, the color of a winter sky at 4 o'clock. "For the life we build slowly," she said. "For the door we keep open," he replied. On their way home, the air smelled like chimney smoke and snow. They stopped at the small church on the corner not to join a service, but to warm up their hands and listen to voices rise together. Neither asked for a sign. They had each other in a ring and the quiet work of days. Sometimes faith looks like that. As dusk folded into night, they climbed the stairs to her building, laughing about nothing, a little breathless from the cold. In the hallway, a neighbor's wreath shed a dusting of needles, and someone down the hall burned cookies and opened a window. The scent was hilariously familiar, an old joke remembered. Inside, the tree blinked them home. They placed the tiny house beside the glass heart. The two ornaments seemed to talk to each other in the way objects do when they've been asked to hold meaning. Gold seam, blue door, what breaks and what begins. They cooked a simple dinner, ruined the first pan, nailed the second, and ate sitting cross-legged on the floor. When they finished, he cleared the plates. And she set 2 mugs on the sill to catch a little snow, like kids who still wanted to prove December could be tasted. "Tell me the thing you're most afraid of now," she said, not unkindly, he thought. "That I'll forget to notice you when life gets loud." "Then let's make noticing louder," she answered. "Let's build it into our days. Not with grand gestures, with small ones. Notes on fruit, walks after dinner. A rule that the first question isn't about work." "Done," he said, like a vow. "And you?" She looked at the window, at the soft drift of white. "That I'll expect magic to fix everything. That when it doesn't, I'll call our love ordinary and treat ordinary like failure." He reached across the space and touched her wrist. "Then we'll practice loving the ordinary until it glows." They didn't kiss like movies do on Christmas Eve. They kissed like people who had learned the worth of slow lips, gentler than the first snow, patient as a porch light. Later, they fell asleep on the couch with the TV murmuring, the trees still blinking, the city moving around them like a tide. Sometime near midnight, Emily woke to the hush that settles when the world decides to let you rest. She stood, tucked a blanket around Ethan's shoulders, and went to the window. The glass was cold beneath her palm. Her reflection floated there, a woman she recognized again. She thought of the girl who had come home to candles and disappointment, of the woman who left the mountains with nothing but a letter and a small, repaired heart. This was the Christmas for one, she realized, not as loneliness, but as foundation. A season that taught her to stand without bargaining for a hand. Now, when his hand found hers, it didn't complete her. It accompanied her. There is a difference, and it is the kind that lasts. She turned, took the ring between her fingers, smiled at how simply it shone, and whispered into the room that would soon be theirs. "We begin." In the morning, they would call Grace and tell her everything, and she would shriek, insult his previous emotional incompetence, and cry happy tears. They would text Nora, who would send back a photo of a snow-dusted cafe patio, and the caption, "Love after loss, tastes like cinnamon." They would write to Clara, both of them, to say thank you, and Clara would reply with a single line, "Doors are open. Come up next year and bring your blue house." And Henry, somewhere in London or the mountains, would temper chocolate and smile at the thought of a snowflake that did its job. But for now, there was only this room, this tree, this beginning that didn't erase what came before, but braided it gently into what came next. The snow kept falling, steady and tender, and the city exhaled around them. Emily lay back down beside the man she had once lost and found again, and listened to the quiet symphony of heat pipes, distant sirens, and a heart, her own beating in a rhythm that finally felt like home. Because the lesson was simple, and it was everything. Learn to hold your life with both hands. Then, if love comes, you'll have one to offer, and one to keep yourself steady. And that, she knew as the first Christmas morning of their second chance arrived, is how a life is made. One quiet, ordinary miracle at a time. Sometimes, the most beautiful stories aren't about grand gestures or perfect endings. They're about small miracles, a letter written in honesty, a heart cracked but mended with gold, a quiet yes whispered after all the noise has faded. Emily's journey wasn't about finding someone to complete her. It was about learning that love doesn't begin when another person arrives. It begins when we finally come home to ourselves. Her Christmas wasn't a fairy tale. It was a reminder that healing is not the opposite of pain, but the companion that walks beside it until we can stand again. Maybe your heart, too, has been broken in places you thought would never heal. Maybe you've carried memories like fragile ornaments, afraid to drop them. But remember this, what's broken is not ruined. It's proof that you have lived, that you have loved, and that you are capable of loving again. In the end, every life is a story, some chapters filled with laughter, others written in tears. Yet, when we keep turning the page, we discover that even after the hardest winters, warmth returns. It always does. So tonight, if you find yourself sitting in the quiet glow of your own Christmas lights, wondering if love or hope or joy will ever find you again, take a deep breath. You're already in the middle of your miracle. Because the truth is simple and eternal. No heart stays broken forever, and no story truly ends as long as you keep believing in beginnings. Thank you for watching, for feeling with us, and for carrying these stories in your own heart. If this tale touched you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. We read every word with care. Here on Lasting Tales, every story leaves a mark time can't erase. We'll see you in the next one.